You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, everyone. It is me, Scotty Roberts, and you're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And if you want to go hear the audio and see all the different outlets where this show plays, and governed by a little tighter rules over there for things I can and cannot say on air, go over to odyssey1.com. That's ODYSY1.com. And by the way, those remarks aren't meant to be disparaging or negative, just that I am not the owner of that network, and this show will go out to several different networks as well as terrestrial stations, and that makes it a little tighter on the rules of some of the Effenheimers and words that we can and cannot say on air. Not that they're always necessary, but they're great for flavor and color. You can also join us over on the YouTube channel, which is our simulcast video of this show, along with the live chat room and all my Intrepeds over there that come and listen to Intrepid Radio. Join in the conversation over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, and Mr. all spelled out. There's the business side of things. Tonight, I want to pick up a topic we started yesterday that was just supposed to be kind of a one-off as I was buffering between different kinds of topics and shows I wanted to do here on Odyssey Radio. And it extended, of course, overnight into the next day because I did not go through all the material I wanted to cover. I think this is an important issue. If you look around you right now, look at our society, especially here in the United States and in the West, Western society and culture. Look at how things are. It feels like there is a degradation, a devolving, an entropy, which plays into something I want to present to you tonight. Entropy being that natural decay of things, for lack of a more concise scientific definition. And the decay appears in all the societal kerfuffle you see going on right now. Nothing is clear. Nothing is clean. Nothing is free of criticism. Everyone is fighting with everyone else. Some people who start doing some things that were meant to be good things have turned into negatives. When you start trying to place too many rules and regulations on a society, even from the sidelines, such as political correctness, what do you end up with? You have something that starts as a great idea. Let's be careful about what we say. Let's not offend people. Let's watch how we conduct ourselves. Those are all very good things. But when they come to the point of you can't say anything anymore without someone being offended, or somebody in their political correctness steps up to say you need to be eradicated or your words need to be silenced, you start an infighting in our culture and our society that's sometimes insurmountable. Because once that starts, it's very hard to stop. And you look at all the great civilizations that have come along in human history, and all of those great civilizations, not many of them are still around today except in small, tiny historical remnants. You've got the ancient Persians, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. All of these big societies, the Mayans, have fallen. And why have they fallen? Because it's something from decay from within. And that decay wasn't always something that started from a negative. It was something that started from having a more open society, a more politically correct society in their own terms. And those are things that started decay and degradation and the slide into non-existence. And I will tell you that if we as a country in the United States don't start getting a handle on this, it will be our demise. That will eventually run us into the mire, and our government will change. We will no longer... And remember, the founders said this is a great experiment. I think some of them might be surprised that we lasted 250 years because they weren't sure where it was going to go. But remember, they did establish for us a system that had never been tried before. And again, Benjamin Franklin, you have a republic, madam, if you can keep it, as he was heard to say. So I think what we see going on in the world around us right now, in our nation, in other parts of the world, is this wild spiral down into demise. And there will be a reckoning. There will be a shakeup. There will be a great change that washes over everything. And if we want to keep any semblance of what we are and who we are and the freedoms that we possess, the liberty to have political correctness and things like that, then we had better keep ourselves in check. As Thomas Jefferson once said, liberty too must be limited in order to be possessed. So there are things where we have to put the checks and balances on ourselves. And I think one of the greatest ways to do this is to be a society that focuses once again on wisdom, on the gaining of wisdom, on the value of wisdom, and at the same time on the value of virtue. And virtue, as we mentioned yesterday, doesn't necessarily mean you become a Puritan society, a society that covers our ankles and buttons our top buttons on our shirts and blouses. That's not what we necessarily mean by virtue. By virtue, it's that inner desire to seek wisdom, to seek being better, to seek doing good. I have friends that I know who have made mistakes, and they've made great falls. I have made my own mistakes. I have hurt people inadvertently through my actions over the years. What do you do about that? Do you stay in the mire? Does that cancel out everything that you or any of these other people I know have done to make themselves virtuous people, good people, wise people? Or are those the things that are the stepping stones along the way? Again, not to be, like a Tony Robbins, rah-rah, let's all motivate ourselves. But there is a truism that says when you fall down, you stay down unless you get back up. So the art of falling down is the art of figuring out new ways to get back up. And so this is what I'm talking about. It's the finding of, the striving for virtue, the striving for being better at what we are, the striving for wisdom in a society that does not place wisdom on a high pedestal anymore. It might be in the background where people go, oh, yeah, we should all have wisdom, we should all have virtue, but those aren't the things we pursue. And I'm not talking just about in exchange for the pursuit of material things or anything like that. What I am saying is that we all need to focus inwardly on looking at the past, learning from the past, reading the great writings of the past that really focus on becoming a virtuous, a good, an honest, a society with integrity that values wisdom. And this all starts on a personal level. It can't be a corporate thing. I'm looking around here for where I left my coffee. Hang on a second, folks. I know it's here. There it is. It's way over here on the other side. All right. I left it sitting on the other side of my desk. And it's cold here. You can tell I've got my woolies on today. This is actually an outer coat that I wear outside when it starts to get cool. The temperature it is right now isn't so bad. As a matter of fact, in the spring, after long, cold, hard winters of sub-zero temperatures, snow, and ice, 49 to 50 degrees outside, with even a cool, brisk wind, you'd be out in your shorts and your flip-flops, chopping the rest of the slushy ice off of your sidewalks. But now, at this time of the year, in the autumn, when we're approaching winter, 45 to 50 degrees in the pre-dawn light with a cool, brisk wind is damn bitterly cold. So I threw on my woolly coat this morning. And by the way, this coat is probably older than some of you. This is a capot of sorts without the hood that I bought at an historical event when we used to do our historical reenacting. We portrayed the 42nd Royal Highlanders in the French and Indian War, which was 1750s. And this was just made out of an old green wool blanket. And this is what the mountain men used to wear, what the soldiers would wear with old blankets that they'd fashion into wool coats. And so that's why I bought this. It goes with my red coat and my kilt and all of that stuff from 1750s, 18th century clothing. But you know what? I wear it with jeans and a t-shirt outside in the winter. I wear it all winter long. It's probably the warmest coat I have, but it's very thin. And because it's wool, it works for everything. I wear it outside. My wife tells me you look like you're walking around in a bathrobe. I said, this does not look like a bathrobe. I'm sorry. This is a historical coat. So there you go. There. How's that for a rabbit trail? Let's move on. And of course, if you're listening audibly, you can't see this. It's an olive drab green wool blanket that was converted into a coat. And it's got the little, what looks like a Western or Indian fringes hanging along the shoulders and things like that, and so on. So sorry you can't see that on the radio. Those of you who are watching on video, you got the advantage of seeing that. That's why I do a video show, so I can show off my ragged old historical clothing. So anyway, let's move back on. So I'm talking about integrity. I stumbled yesterday across an article I had written a few years ago, and I was reading it and I said, did I write that? I didn't even remember writing it, but it's got some smacks of things that I talk about and say. And I've written so many things over the years that this article was one of those things that I had forgotten I wrote. It was over on the Mysterious Universe site is where it got published. And I wrote it, I think it was 5 years ago yesterday. No, today, because it's dated October 22nd of 2015. So I would have written that 5 years ago today. And when I write articles, I generally don't put a lot of study and research into them. I just crack them off because they're what I'm thinking. So I probably wrote this 5 years ago today or yesterday and submitted it over to Mysterious Universe. But I wanted to go through this article because it applies to what we're talking about. It's got some thoughts in there that I think are pertinent to what we're talking about. And right now, I'm swift approaching my 59th birthday, which is coming up in about a month. And 59 years old, that is the cusp of 60, folks. And I still am 25 in my head, maybe 19 in my actions some days, but I hope I've matured along the way, gained a little wisdom along the way. I am not a pillar of virtue, but I hope that people who know me and experience me and listen to me, read me, all of that can see that I'm somebody who values virtue, attempting to reach that point, to be someone of virtue, of honesty, of integrity. But all things decay as well. I just look at my body in the mirror. I'm 59 years old. I'm not a kid anymore, even though I still have some of those kid aspects in my head. And so I'm swift approaching my 59th birthday, and with that comes a lot of reflection, a lot of rumination, a lot of trepidation, and an indefatigable desire to achieve all that I set out to do in life. And believe you me, I had goals. I remember in my 20s saying, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be a multi-millionaire, and I'm going to have a big comic book publishing company. That's what I wanted to do back then. And I'll have my own building, and I spelled it all out for everyone. That was one of my goals. And of course, That's still on the back burner. I'd still love to do something like that. But there's still all these other things that we do. Goals that I have that I'm still trying to attain. Lots of things I want to accomplish. Some people call that a bucket list. I say I have goals, one and the same. And hopefully one day, in the not-too-distant future, it'll be said of me that I did mighty things, that I strived for great goals, and that I left a worthwhile scratch on the wall of humanity. But not too long ago, as I began to accept the fact that my youth was fleeting and middle age was encroaching, which I'm now well past middle age, I adopted a rather grim, sardonic outlook on my mortal life. And despite my external positivity, and I've always believed in myself that I've had this damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead bravado about my life, I still began to grapple with the grave certainty that I have fewer years left ahead than those that are behind. If you were to double my years today, I'd be, 118 years old by the time I reached double what I am now. So that ain't going to happen, I don't think, unless some miracle thing comes along in the next few years to lengthen life and make you enjoy it while you're doing it. But I've grappled with that grave certainty in my life that, you know what, I've spent my youth and I've got a lot of things going on. So, sorry I did not turn off my ringer on my phone. Sorry about that. And for the background noise. So, I have fewer years left ahead than behind. Life is going to afford me no favors. I've had a few breaks along the way, but I still have not achieved that place I wanted to be in life. I guarantee you, well, no. Let me not put that way. I'm going to tell you I will probably be one of those guys that you approach me when I'm 75 to 80 and I'm still trying to do work. Not because I don't want to do the work, but because I probably need to do the work. So it seemed to me over these recent years that life indeed was a thing that was much more entropic than I had realized during my misspent youth. And when left to itself, as with all things, it simply decays and fades into nothingness. Theological chiasmata notwithstanding, there are life decays, and it comes to an end. And all the brilliant, beautiful things that you may become in your life, all of those things disappear with you. And the question is, what do you leave behind? It was like Leonard Nimoy, and this just popped into my head. I don't remember the quote, but Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock in Star Trek, not long before he died, he wrote something about life is this beautiful garden that you plant. And I think the intent of it, if I remember it, it was something that stays and remains with you even after you're gone, because you've spent time working on this beautiful garden. As a matter of fact, no, I'm not going to look it up right now. Let's just keep going. The great question that I face, and that I began facing not long ago, was how to beat the entropy. Is entropy beatable? Entropy is the decay and dissolve of all things. How do you outrun the quantum tendrils of morality that seem always to be licking at our heels? The further I got from my happy-go-luckiness that I had in my 20s and even into my 30s and a bit into my 40s, the keener became my realization that 1,000 years from now, we will all be but dust, and a scant few of our deeds will ever be recalled from future antiquity. We're all decaying, we'll all die, we'll all pass on. How many common folk of 1,000 years ago do we know much about? Now, granted, today we have a much more technological age. There are things we record and do. I take lots of pictures and I put them up on social media. I have them stored. Will those be available to be seen 1,000 years from now? Will they be transposed into higher forms of technology after I die by my descendants? The trick, I decided, was to identify the anti-entropies in life. You know, those syntropies that culminate in some sort of thermodynamic representation of dynamic order existence. Or in other words, the realization that life's a piece of shit when it's left to its own. And it's what you do with it that really counts and matters. Leon Brillouin, I think it's Brillouin. Leon, or Leon, because of the way he's got the accent marks on his name. Brillouin, probably. He never spoke more clearly, at least to me, than when he coined the term negentropy. Negentropy. That stuff, the negative entropy, that is the exact opposite of entropy. Could it be, folks, that there exists a double negative of life? You know what a double negative is. It's like, no, I am not going there. It's the double negative. You know, no, I'm not doing that. Or no, to your no, I'm not doing that. Meaning yes. So it's the not life is that I'm talking about. The not life. The negative of entropy, the opposite of entropy. And I'm going to suggest to you that negentropy is that cacophonous vacuum that we fill with all the stuffs of the not life. Not the not life, the not life. All the positive things. So negentropy is what we fill it with all these things that are not life. Those things we gather and incorporate to keep entropy at bay. It's the force that seeks to achieve effective organizational behavior and lead us to a steady, predictable state of growth that is apart from decay, comprised of the stuffs we identify as being anti-living. You know what those are. You can name them with me. Our children, our family, our goals, our dreams, our accomplishments, our legacies. These are all the anti-life things that we engage in. And what an utter waste of our lives it would be to look back and realize that while we were so busy struggling against its shortcomings and its decays, life gave us the slip and passed us by. It wasn't it John Lennon, one of the Beatles, who said, life is that thing that passes you by while you're waiting for it to happen. So I suggest that we are all a natural part of entropy, of universal decay. And the moment we're born, we begin the process of decay and degradation to inevitable death. How's that for a cheery thought for tonight? The beauty of it is that we can incorporate this negentropy to make it all so much more worthwhile. To paraphrase Thoreau, and you may have heard something like this, and if you remember the movie, the Robin Williams movie, The Dead Poets Society, he said, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to take a bite out of life and suck all the marrow of the bones of life, putting to death all that was not life, so that when I came to die, I would not realize that I had not lived. And that's it for our first segment, folks. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about life, about virtue, and about wisdom. So you hang tight. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Hey folks, welcome back from that break. You're listening to me, Scotty Roberts, right here on the Intrepid radio program, here on the Odyssey Radio Network, ODYSY1.com, to hear the audio. And come on over to my YouTube channel to see the simulcast video of this show, where you can join the live chat room filled with all the Intrepids that like this show. And that's over at Mr. Scotty Roberts over on YouTube. So come and look up my channel and join us over there. Last night, when we were talking about wisdom, I ended with talking about how our culture does little to learn wisdom from its elderly. We no longer really outwardly go out of our ways to look for wisdom from those who have gone on before us. As a matter of fact, I see a lot of people in nursing home situations. You see orderlies and nurses and people talk to our elderly like they're little children. It's like, oh, would you like some pudding with that tonight, Margaret? How are we doing today? You know, and maybe there are some people that need that, but I wonder what goes on, and I suppose one day I'll find out, in the mind of somebody who is elderly and well on in years, and they have somebody talk to them like that. We're thinking, oh, you poor sap. You know, I could talk circles around you if I could remember what I was talking about. So, despite the fact that older people are a major source of wisdom in our society, most are disregarded for that. And I think we don't pay much attention to older folks and to older writings and older accounts of wisdom teaching, virtue teaching, things like that. And again, virtue, I cannot emphasize this enough. That's why I'm saying it again. Virtue, by virtue, I do not mean being prissy and puritanical. Virtue is that stuff of the core that comes up. It develops wisdom. Virtue, properly nurtured, becomes wisdom. Virtue is who you are on the inside, the honesty, the integrity, the goodness that you want to display, despite the fact that there's not a lot of it around you. So, what was the fall and the decline of the primary value of wisdom in our culture? Some historical societies have placed duty as the highest goal, while others emphasize righteousness. And still others have strength or progress. All of these require wisdom. For example, to paraphrase Aristotle, if a society's definition of duty, righteousness, strength, or progress is noble, then seeking duty, righteousness, progress, or strength is laudable. But if the society's definition of these things is bad, then seeking them is mere cleverness. A society like ours, that frequently puts success as the highest priority, needs a wide definition for success. Otherwise, seeking success is merely selfishness. I got to tell you, there are some days where I look at my life and I have succeeded nothing because I gauge it by societal gauges and measures. I say, I don't have that big piece of property I wanted, wouldn't build the dream house I wanted to build. I don't have 2 cars. I don't take 3 vacations a year with my family. I don't have a bank account stuffed full of money. And I look at those things right there and I say, those are all material things. Yeah, I want to have a nice house. I want to have a nice piece of land. Yeah, I want to drive a nice car that doesn't have rusty pieces falling off of it. That doesn't have my van. Our family van just turned 300,000 miles a couple of days ago. And it's doing just that. It's got little things. Thank God I knock on wood and hope that thing's going to last us for a while, because there's little bits and pieces that want to start falling off of it. So a wise definition of success is not necessarily looking at the material things, but it includes genuine happiness. Ask yourself, are you happy? Is your life happy? Or are you constantly anxious and stressed by where you need to be, sometimes out of necessity? Keep the roof over the head. Keep the lights on. keep the car running. In other words, part of wisdom is prudence, which includes the ability and the habit of seeing how the lessons of the past and the events now occurring will most likely impact the future and allow us to provide for it. And some of that's not all necessarily material things, but it involves the material nuts and bolts of life. Another vital part of wisdom is knowledge, and still another is understanding. Aristotle went a step further and said, it's impossible to be practically wise without being good. You realize that? There are a lot of people who have achieved a lot in life that are not wise people, probably because at the core they are not good people. They are not happy people. Remember, it was always said that money can't buy you happiness. Well, I disagree with that to a certain point. Money can buy you a hell of a lot of happiness, just as the lack of money can buy you a whole hell of a lot of unhappiness. But it can't buy you lasting peace and joy and virtue and wisdom. That's what I'm saying. But sometimes it can lay the groundwork to create an atmosphere where you have time to do those things. We get so caught up in doing that we don't look to the things that are necessary for the heart. And I mean the metaphoric heart, for the soul, for the betterment of ourselves. So Socrates said that no talent, strength, ability, or virtue are of any real value if it's absent wisdom. Wisdom strengthens every other strength, and its absence nullifies or at least weakens any supposed strength. Socrates went on to say, everything the soul attempts under the guidance of wisdom ends in happiness. And Aristotle applies the same thing to nations. Wisdom is the indisputable element of success, personal, national, societal. You have to have wisdom applied in order for your personal life, your society, your nation to be happy. Why do you think the United States today, for those of you listening, I'm assuming most of you are Americans, some of you are Canadians, some of you are Brits, some of you are Australians and New Zealanders, and a whole slew of you from Africa and Europe. But most of us here, I think, are American, United States Americans. Because Canadians are Americans too, by the way. They're just North Americans, more North than we are. So, everybody out there, why do you think our nations are so unhappy? Why do you think elections are so unhappy? And fallouts from elections and politics and racism and political correctness and bigotry and blah, 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 et cetera, going on and on. Why is there so much unhappiness out there? It's because we don't elevate wisdom to a high level. For those who see progress as the highest goal of society, a wise definition and application of progress is needed. Progressives at times, and I know a lot of liberal progressives, maybe there are even some conservative progressives, that forget this, as do those that seek success. While some have defined progress in terms of economic justice, others have put it more in terms of political liberty. Where do you place progress? Is it financial freedom, economic freedom? Is it political liberty? The American founding ideals combined these in a complexly considered yet ultimately simple formula. It says this: all people must have equal opportunity before the law by being treated as part of the same class. And the innate differences in individuals and their choices preclude an exact equality of results. But equality of opportunity before the law is the starting point of real freedom everyone has to have, by law, equal opportunity. I'm not talking about always by practice. We don't always all have the same opportunities. And by the way, I am not a believer in white supremacy or white privilege. Everybody has equal privilege and equal opportunity. It's whether they set about trying to make those things happen and work hard to make them happen. The goal of American farmers was a truly wise government. That's the start of real freedom. And I bring up farmers as a particular instance. You can apply that to businessmen. You can apply that to scientists, to artists, to musicians, who I would put in the classification as artists as well. So the goal of framers, I said farmers, of the framers was thus a truly wise government. Government needs to be of the people, by the people, for the people. And government needs to be wise at its core. In our time, unfortunately, the goal of wisdom has been largely lost. And it's certainly undervalued and seldom discussed. How many times do you get around with friends and have a few pints and talk about wisdom and the gaining of wisdom? I know sometimes it can be wrapped in our discussions, but how many times do we sit around and say, this is what we're going to be? I mentioned last night the movie Tolkien, which I just watched the other day, and what impressed me was these young, really prep school kids who were not yet at university, and they formulated a society of 4 friends whose main goal was to change the world. How many young people nowadays have as a goal, I need to change the world, and we need to be a group of people that make a pact to change the world and make an impact on our world? I know those people exist, but it's not as much as it used to be. So the goal of wisdom has been largely lost, and it's certainly undervalued, and it's seldom discussed. It may be assumed by some or even by many, but it's lost its place as the first and most prominent value in our society. And societies that once held wisdom as the highest value, only to lose it later, include Athens, ancient Israel, the Roman Republic, Great Britain, among many others. When they lost the central priority of wisdom, they soon lost their place as world leaders and as nations that would exist for long periods of time. And it shouldn't be forgotten that the wisdom priority was part of what brought them each to power in the first place. One key to overcoming this modern slide or entropic decay away from wisdom is to remember what government is really for. Aristotle taught that. He said, the state is the last stage in the development of societal life, in which the family, and therefore all government actions, can be easily and effectively judged by how they positively impact the family. Sometimes a return to the most basic principles is what's at the height of wisdom. It's burning off all the dross. As an old songwriter once said, for when I'm tried and purified, I'll come forth as gold. We have to burn off the excess sometimes. Aristotle says that the study of truth is, in one way, hard, and yet in another way, very easy. It's hard when we want to know every detail of truth, easy when we simply seek to find and apply wise principles. So, there are indispensable elements of success. What if we turned the modern debate between science, art, politics, conservatives, liberals, and all the various isms, to burn that all away from ultimate truth and focused instead on wisdom? I don't care what political bent you are, or ideological bent, let's use that word again. I don't care if you're an artist or a scientist, a politician or a farmer, a whatever, plug in your own titles into the blanks there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, because a return to studying wisdom would likely coincide with what's called the replacement of the success approach with a renewal of the character ethic. I don't care if you are where you are politically, where you are in life, if you don't have a character ethic, a virtue at the core that seeks wisdom, you're nothing. To paraphrase Paul, who wrote the New Testament, he says, if I have all these great things about my life and I can speak great words, but I don't have love at the core, he says, I'm like a sounding timbrel or a ringing brass. And it got ring, but it's no substance. It fades away. Are we a society, and are you a person that is obsessed with noticeable achievement or dedicated to meaningful contribution? Do we mostly value marketability or quality? These naturally separate into these competing categories. And I think of what Rocky has said many times. He says the numbers don't matter. He says it's that we present information out there, that there are even a handful of people that it might mean something to them. We do what we do on the radio because we enjoy doing it. Yeah, it'd be nice to make a living at it, so that's all we'd had to do, and we could dedicate all our time to it, but that doesn't always happen. So the numbers game, if you pursue that, is pursuing the material element as opposed to the innate character or integrity or honesty or goodness or virtue or wisdom of what you're doing. This naturally separates into competing categories. The first, called great, includes wisdom, character, quality, meaningful contribution. Against this is pitted the second category of good, great versus good, which includes the positive but lesser values of success, marketability, notability, and achievement. When you're in business parlance, the good is the enemy of the great. So which is more important to our future? A society that argues about truth, or a society seeking to learn and apply wisdom? Apply that today. Look at what's going on in our country around us today. A society that argues about truth, or a society that's seeking to learn and apply wisdom? Which would be the better society? Do we need a nation of people who want to be seen as leaders, or do we need a society of people who lead? And by the way, being a leader doesn't necessarily mean you have a leadership position somewhere. I used to tell the kids in my youth group, I said, true leadership is servanthood. It's putting yourself out there to serve others. It's getting your fingernails dirty when no cameras are around or nobody's there to sing your praises. And too often the language of modern experts is like the following talk show parody that says, all brontosauruses are thin at one end, much, much thicker in the middle, and then thin again at the far end. This is a factual statement, but it's not very helpful. You can prove it using science, but knowing this truth doesn't really accomplish much. Another example would be even if World War I consisted of nothing but a very, very large number of quarks in a very, very complicated pattern of motion, no insight is gained by describing it this way. We don't learn by scientific truth. We learn by application. We learn by seeking the wisdom of something. Those are ridiculous examples I brought up, but they're a lot like the reality. Since Steven Pinker, who I've quoted many times, he wrote the Better Angels of Our... why can't I remember the title? It'll come to me. Steven Pinker wrote, Social psychologists have aptly documented that people have a powerful urge to do as their neighbors do. When unwitting subjects are surrounded by confederates of the experimenter who have been paid to do something odd, many or most will go along. They'll defy their own eyes and call a long line short, or vice versa, nonchalantly filling out a questionnaire as smoke pours out of a heating vent, or suddenly strip down to their underwear for no apparent reason just because everyone else in the room is doing so. And Pinker was citing some examples of something there. People go along with the crowd. This is where we get the grossly negative term sheeple. So certainly politics frequently proves this sad reality, that people go along with the norm, they go along with the crowd, they go along with the crowd that thinks for them, rather than stepping out and developing any wisdom about anything. I apply this to the way I look at the current sitting president. There's a lot of criticism for him out there, and a lot of people who can't believe that I supported him and still do. And I say, you gotta apply wisdom. You gotta look a little deeper to what's really going on. So, truth alone is limited, folks. It needs wisdom to make any sense. And indeed, only with wisdom can we actually understand truth when we find it. Yet we've emphasized and idealized truth for over a century in our modern society. This leads to stagnation in our political and our national progress. Those on the right have tended to seek truth for success, while their counterparts on the left have sought truth for progress. Both have achieved much, but we've reached a point where both are failing to deliver such solutions to our major challenges. What's going on out there? Could it be we don't have wisdom at the core? We don't have a seeking of virtue at the heart of the matter. Today, what's really needed in the West and in our Western culture is a paradigm shift. A people who diligently want to seek wisdom. First personally, then nationally. Does it make any sense in our current postmodern society to keep engaging in the debates between science, art, religion, conservative, progressive, socialist, libertarian, hawk or dove? These dialogues have been in a rut for decades. And it's like I've heard for the last 50 years, everybody who wants to get elected to office was going to fight for you for this. Yet the same problems exist today that existed when that was starting to be said 40 and 50 years ago. Nothing ever gets resolved. It's an election line that sheeple listen to and follow without applying wisdom. If real progress in such arguments seemed likely, would of course keep talking. But America is increasingly divided into like-thinking cliques that reinforce shared views and attack everything about the alternative perspectives. And these voluntary factions frequently isolate themselves from competing viewpoints and increase their adamant views rather than seek the wisdom of the matter. This enclave style of thinking is in the norm in our current world. The internet, as I've said many times, has dramatically and drastically exacerbated that problem. So many people espouse opinions and take stances on things that they know nothing about. So they don't think any deeper than their noses. So there are fortunately some exceptions to this end. The rise of political independence may be the rescue of the current closing of the American mind. The millennial generation remains to be seen how they're going to affect our society. That's roughly, if you didn't know it, 84 to 2001, people being born in that range. And its inclusive, open, and dialogue-oriented approach than boomers and Gen Xers might be something that they want to choose. And given their generational values and tendencies, it may or may not be the case. It still has to be seen. Ultimately, wisdom is about more than just mere knowing something. It requires doing something, putting things to action. You have to apply knowledge to make wisdom work, or it isn't really wisdom. This is true in domestic affairs, family affairs, international affairs. Washington has lost a lot of its reputation for wisdom across America and around the globe. Would you say that the core of wisdom in our nation lies in Washington, D.C.? Don't laugh too hard. Don't spit out your coffee. Our increasing dependence on experts since maybe the 1970s and 1980s, maybe go earlier, go the 50s and the 60s, has reduced the role of parents as the wise ones in the home. You notice how school likes to take over parenting. Wisdom is undervalued at nearly all levels in our modern world. And I got to tell you what, while there are some good teachers and good school administrations out there, I know what's better for my kids, and I apply wisdom. But we're not looked at as that way because we're not the expert. You're not an expert on child rearing. Well, yeah, I am. I've got 6 of them. I think I know what I'm doing now. But I want to apply wisdom and instill in them wisdom. So we glorify all the externals, but we don't promote the internal. We undersell or we simply ignore the indispensable element of lasting success in truly progressing society, which is based in wisdom at its core. We need a healthy dose of optimism in our society, and maybe nothing would merit more optimism than a national paradigm shift to a wisdom society, and it all starts with us. So let me ask you, do you pursue wisdom? Do you pursue virtue? Where are you on that linear look at things that come from the core? Are you here where you don't recognize wisdom, or are you here where you apply wisdom? So make a paradigm shift that starts in yourself and look for ways to be virtuous, look for ways to be wise. And I wrap that up kind of quickly because we're out of time. And I want to be done with this topic. We're going to move on to something else tomorrow. We're going to take a 23-hour break, after which we'll be back. I thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.